All right, James, my friend, happy to pass the gavel to you.
Senator Carper, thank you for vamping for me. I appreciate that very much. I never have to worry if you're going to run out of words.
We make it up as we go along.
I got it. So, y'all, thanks again for the conversation. Let me ask some additional questions. Ms. Shriver, we didn't get a chance to be able to talk in the last round of questioning, so I want to walk through several things back with you. Thanks again for the long conversation that we had to be able to walk through a lot of issues in greater depth, and we'll have the opportunity to be able to do here. There's a challenge in some of our agencies on the federal workforce getting back to the office post-COVID. Some of them have been very effective at that. Some of them are continuing to be able to work through what's going to be telework, what's going to be remote work, what's going to be in-office work. But there's some in-office work that's still not actually in office, and it's slowing down, and we have a backlog in multiple different agencies right now, noticeably the IRS, State Department and passport work. We've got a lot of issues and backlogs in multiple of our entities in Social Security that have face-to-face needs to be able to connect with folks. How do we get folks back to work so we can catch up with the backlog? Most of corporate America, most private businesses around the country are open again and engaged. How do we get the federal workforce back in?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And I think I want to first start by acknowledging that during the pandemic, fully half of the federal government continued to show up in the workplace day in and day out to do the work of the American people. And we owe them a debt of gratitude for that. And you're right that for the rest, there was a different footing. There was, in many places, a maximum telework footing. And there was a process that the administration ran around reentry, and that process was laid out in a memorandum M2125 that OMB, OPM, and GSA issued together. And the thing I want to highlight from that is that these decisions need to be made with delivery of the mission in mind. Productivity, delivery of the mission, those need to be paramount. So agencies conducted their reentry back. Most of them got done in April, and a few took a little bit longer, but that reentry has occurred. And now we're in that process of evaluating, now that we've reentered, how are these new hybrid work arrangements working? What is the impact on productivity? What is the impact on mission delivery? And it's important that agencies continue to make that assessment. I think the one last thing I would say, Senator, though, is that I think if an agency were to just go back to the way things were prior to the pandemic in February of 2020, I think that they would lose a lot of talent to other sectors. So this needs to be done strategically, but I think we can all agree we need to put productivity and mission delivery first.
We do. Actually, strategically doesn't mean delay. It can be intentional, and that's been the challenge that a lot of my constituents have in Oklahoma that'll contact me and say, hey, I can't get a hold of somebody face-to-face in Social Security, or I can't get my passport done, or I can't get access to IRS, or I can't. It's always there was a person there, I've got to meet with a person, I've got to be able to answer it, and they're not there. And they're confused because their bank is open, the restaurants are open, their business is open, everybody else is open, and they're saying, well, we're still trying to be able to work through the process of coming back in. I think that's the issue that really infuriates Oklahomans, is to say we're all open and suddenly it's, okay, we're different than you, we're not open yet, but it's also behind. So getting the mission done is incredibly important, as well as protecting those individuals that are also in the workforce, because I have great respect for the federal employees as well, and to continue to be able to protect them as we do on everybody else. You and I had a good conversation yesterday about the world's largest pilot program for telework that just happened with COVID. It's interesting to me, the federal studies that were done in agencies just a few years ago said about 19% of their employees could go telework. And then COVID happens, and in some agencies we had 80% plus that were in telework posture on it, and everybody kind of figured out how to be able to make this work. Now, post-COVID, we got people back in the workforce, but we've also learned that we can do things telework and we can do things remote work. So my question to you is, in remote work, that is an individual that is not living around the headquarters, is not expected to be sometimes in the office and sometimes working somewhere else, that's not expected to be in the office, a true remote work individual. What are your thoughts and opinions about expanding the highly qualified pool of workforce around the country to be remote work individuals, and those individuals that may be spouses of our military, that work in very remote military installations, that have a very difficult time having a career? They may be able to get a job on the different base or posts, but they can't really build a career anywhere because they move every 2 to 3 years with their spouse. giving them the opportunity to build a career in the federal family based on doing remote work wherever they may be.
Ranking Member Lankford, thank you for the question, and I enjoy talking to you about this topic because I think it's really a game changer for the federal government. I think that agencies are experimenting right now with some remote work pilots. There was a little bit of remote work that happened prior to the pandemic. I think they're experimenting with where maybe we can think more broadly about it. One of the things that's exciting about remote work is it opens the possibility of federal employment to communities all throughout the country, where previously those opportunities were only available if people moved, sometimes into a different state, many hundreds of miles. Remote work makes that a new possibility for those communities. I especially appreciate your connection to military spouses. You know, we have special authorities in the federal government that allow for a streamlined hiring process for military spouses. And I think that's sound public policy and something to build on. They're rather underutilized, and I think that if we were able to pair those hiring authorities with remote work opportunities where, exactly as you say, military spouses could stay in their same job no matter where their spouse might be deployed, I think that that would be a good thing for the civil service, a good thing for the folks that serve our country in the military, and a good thing for those spouses, because I know they have a lot to add to what we do day in and day out.
Yeah. So thanks for mentioning the hiring authorities on it. We have about 120 hiring authorities, but every agency still calls me and says, I want direct hiring authority. I don't like any of the 120 that are out there as possibilities, and the vast majority of the 120 aren't ever used. They're niche, different hiring authorities that are out there. But the whole structure of how we do hiring, 100 days to hire, the process, you mentioned in some of your written documents in advance, you want to speed up the hiring process and make that a more efficient process. What are your ideas for that?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member, and we certainly do lose out on good candidates for federal jobs because of the length of time it takes. So this is something that we must address. I think one of the top new tools that we've been working on with agencies is to move away from just the old model of one job announcement, one job, let's go one at a time and hire people into the federal government, to more pooled hiring. And what I mean by pooled hiring is agencies have similar jobs, right? Like they're looking for people with similar skill sets. How can we do a pooled hiring action where we get a whole bunch of qualified candidates and multiple agencies can then hire from that? That would make a dramatic impact on the time to hire, because you would do all of this good work, recruiting and assessing candidates, and have this big pool of well-qualified folks that any agency could hire from. So I think that's important. I also think it's really important that we focus on the assessments that we're using to determine the skills of applicants, because I think too often what happens if we don't do a good job of recruiting and assessing the talent, then the hiring manager's not happy with the candidates they get at the end of the day, and they may start the process all over again, which adds exponentially to the time to hire.
Right, and then you deal with the dynamics of people self-assessing their own skill level with that, and they're being taught, you know, make sure you mark yourself at the highest level of all of them, or you're not going to get there. And you have people say, well, I still have areas to grow in this, and they'd be a very highly qualified candidate, but they just don't self-assess them as high as their actual skill level is. There was a story I heard when I was in Oklahoma several years ago in one of our federal facilities that we need to hire a forklift driver, and it took over 100 days to be able to hire someone to drive the forklift. They were having a real struggle with it because they could go, forklift drivers would go to other companies and they would get hired faster, and then by the time we got back to them in the federal entity, they've already worked at some of the place another 2 months and they're not going to quit. The other thing is they would say, well, I'm not going to rank myself the highest level as a forklift operator because I've only driven a forklift 3 years. I know a friend of mine that he's driven a forklift 20 years. He's a lot better than I am, so I'm not going to rank myself as high as him, though they're highly qualified. They've been doing it for 2.5, 3, 4, 5 years. Would definitely meet the standard of what we're actually looking for on it. but they have their own challenge with the whole assessment process. So we're very interested in this as a committee on what we can do to actually fix the hiring process, to be able to expedite this, to get more transitions from interns into positions, more highly qualified individuals within the pool nationwide, more individuals that will want to be able to engage in this process and to be a faster process to be able to work through it. So just know that this committee is very interested to be able to work with you to be able to accomplish that in the days ahead.
Thank you for your interest, Ranking Member. I would be happy to work with you in the committee on these issues.
Well, again, this shouldn't be a partisan issue. We should go get the best possible people to be able to serve their neighbors and their friends across the nation, serving in the federal family on this. Mr. Rivez, I want to be able to follow up on a couple of things as well. I asked you yesterday a very difficult question. Independent agencies are independent of who? Because independent agencies often feel like they're independent of everyone, but I don't believe that that's actually so. And I'm not sure, based on your response yesterday, that you believe that's actually so as well. The challenge is getting OIRA's oversight to be able to help independent agencies to actually do the rulemaking process and the regulatory process for them to be able to make sure they're making good decisions. And again, we don't end up in years of litigation based on they just didn't have good accountability. How do we deal with the issue of independent agencies?
Thank you, Senator. As I indicated, I strongly believe that the benefits of significant regulation should justify their costs, and the regulations agencies should seek to maximize the net benefits of regulation as the executive order provides, except where statutes dictate otherwise. I have written about how the quality of analysis has been better in the executive branch and independent agencies. And I believe that OIRA's role in diffusing good practices throughout the executive branch accounts for these differences. There are ways in which OIRA could help analysis in independent agencies short of extending the executive order. A model for that is a memorandum of understanding between the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and OIRA following the passage of the Dodd-Frank legislation. On the specific question of extending the executive order, in 1981, the Office of Legal Counsel issued an opinion stating that the president has the authority to extend the executive order to independent agencies. And the executive order already extends to independent agencies with respect to the requirement that they submit their unified regulatory agendas to OIRA for review every year. If confirmed, I would like to work with the OIRA team to ascertain ways in which OIRA can help improve analysis across the federal government, not just in the executive branch, but across independent agencies as well. And I look forward to working with you and members of your staff on that question. On the specific decision whether the president should extend the executive order to independent agencies, well, it's one for Congress and the president to make. I think presidents for the last 40 years have known that they have that authority, and for whatever reason, presidents for the last 40 years have not extended it with respect to this aspect of OIRA's work, even though they have extended with respect to other aspects of OIRA's work.
Okay. I look forward to that ongoing conversation. One final question for you on this, and it's dealing with some of the environmental review studies, modeling, and such that actually goes through cost-benefit analysis. Occasionally, the studies that are used for regulatory and the cost-benefit analysis are not made public. They're proprietary models is typically the conversation that's made, and so the American public has a new regulation imposed on them, but actually can't see the model of why this is actually a benefit or what the cost would be because the model is proprietary. The challenge is, if the regulation is going to be public, the reason the regulation should be there should also be public. How do we deal with these secret studies that are in the background to say, trust me, this warrants this, but you can't see it? How do we deal with that?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm a strong believer in transparency in the regulatory process, and scientific studies are often the building blocks for regulation because they're what tells us that, pollution is causing, this number of deaths or this number of illnesses or this number of lost work days and so on. And I believe that scientific studies should be public and the underlying information should be public. There is an issue about how to protect the individual identities of the subjects of scientific studies. I think, probably not, all of us would be a little worried about participating in studies if we thought that our sort of full health records for the rest of our lives would be available on public websites. And in days of large data, it is sometimes difficult to mask that information, because there have been studies showing how this information can then be put back together and associated with individual people. So that's a challenge. I think the scientific community has norms about this, and in general, agencies do rely on peer-reviewed studies and should rely on peer-reviewed studies. And peer-reviewed studies have to meet the standards of scientific journals, which deal precisely with this issue. And it's an issue I care about and I'm interested in, and if confirmed, I would see how best we can promote the transparency norms that I hold so dear, while at the same time protecting the privacy interests of individuals who are subject to these studies.
Right. So the challenge of that is a peer-reviewed study is still a limited group of individuals to be able to see it, and you're still into the trust me, we've looked at it and it's okay model. We have to be able to have a way to be able to have models, systems, processes that if we're going to have transparency, we have full transparency. Right. It's the joy of us as Americans. We love each other and we don't trust each other at the same time. And so we try to work through the process of saying, if we're going to make this decision together, being we the people, then we need to be able to have the access to look at it, whether they actually look at it or not. When you tell somebody I can't see it, then immediately the suspicion is what's in it. And that's a fair question through our history to be able to ask. And it'll be one of those things that we've got to be able to work through.
I agree, Senator. And I think generally scientific journals have increased the requirements for making data public, and there's been a significant trend in that direction. And I think it's a salutary one.
Yeah, it's one we have to resolve. Gentlemen, thanks again. Thanks to your families for being here for a long day of questioning. All this will go on the record.